I think that because the question of what happens at the end of it will be on everybody's mind. This is constitutionally going to be the last term that Vladimir Putin can serve. And what happens afterwards is very unsettling and important. I think there will be three big things that the world need, which observers need to watch. One is obviously, or three factors that will define the agenda. One is international relations and Russia and geopolitics in isolation, how Russia manages it. The second is economy, because the economy is stagnating, it's not growing. And so far Vladimir Putin has been able to stay in power partly because when people drew comparisons between the current condition and the 1990s, they said, okay, well, we still live better now. Well, he'll be in power now for 24 years by the end of his last term. And that's two generations. I mean, they don't remember what happened in the 1990s. All they remember, a lot of the young people, will be that their life was better in the early 2000s and now it's worse. So the economy will be very important for him staying in power. And the third is the question of succession. Because these personalistic regimes are not very good at managing the transition of power. That's why democracies on the whole are more stable systems. Putin's legitimacy is that of a tsar, effectively. It's not through an election. It's through support of the people who see him scoring victories, expanding Russian territory, etc. And even the royals and even the tsars in Russia found it very difficult to transfer power. The communists found it very difficult. Russia had very relatively short periods of peaceful transition of power, in the second half of the 19th century, really, and for a few years at the end of the 20th century. But for the most of Russian history, the transition of power has been accompanied by some form of violence, either coup or street violence, riots. So I think the two things which people will need to watch is how he manages the relationship with the West, and he relies on foreign policy victories as he sees them to stay popular at home, and how he manages that succession, what happens of him at the end of the term. I think it will continue to stagnate. I can't see, and stagnation may be -1%, +1%, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it will be catastrophic. I don't think that Russian economy will implode. I don't think that it will grow in a big way either, because the fundamental factor which drives economic growth, which is competition and private sector, is not there. There is very little competition, and the private sector the market is getting smaller and smaller. So I think it will continue to stagnate, and that will deliver political challenges which are different from those of a sharp crisis, because all the crises in the past have been what the economists call a V-shaped crisis, where you have a very dramatic fall and a very quick recovery. Now we're not going to have either, but in terms of the mood of the population, actually it's worse, because Russians are very good in a moment of crisis. They're not very good at the moment when they have to work for a very long time in a very mundane kind of way. It's very hard to say whether it's exaggerated or underrated. I think, put it this way, I think it's exaggerated or amplified or made efficient by the weaknesses in the West. I think Putin only able to exploit the weaknesses that are there. He can't create the weakness. He can exploit the divisions in America and exploit the weaknesses of President Trump. He can't create President Trump. He can exploit the divisions in Britain over the membership of the European Union. He can meddle in it and exploit Brexit. He can't create Brexit. And the same as in Catalonia, you know, the fact that there were people on the streets in Barcelona is not Putin's doing, but once people are out on the street in Barcelona, he sees an opportunity and they can meddle, and they do meddle, and they will continue to meddle for as long as they're allowed to do that by the West. Television is incredibly important to Putin. They believe that Russia is under attack from the West. Russia is under, you know, the West is waging an information war against Russia. They see that everything that the West writes or broadcasts about them, all this stuff about human rights, criticism, is part of the information warfare by the West. They think the West is hypocritical and it's really to overthrow Putin. Therefore, they feel they need to defend themselves and engage in a war as well. And they feel, yes, that they are waging an information war against the West because they've been attacked. So whatever you think about the first one, I obviously don't think that the West is waging an information war against the Kremlin or against Russia. We're doing our job. You know, I'm a British journalist. You know, we report what we think is interesting to our readers, not what's interesting to the British government, which is what the Kremlin thinks. But yes, they think they are in war, and therefore it's only fair that they should be counterattacking. No, I don't think the media is free. I don't think there is a freedom, or there is a monopoly. Well, again, it's slightly more complicated. There is a dominance of the state in television and in print, and as soon as somebody comes up in the mainstream media, they are able to close it down. Whether it's a newspaper or it's an independent television channel, they can close it down, they can put pressure on it. So there is no fair competition between opinions. But in terms of the prospects, I don't think that television is going to change. I don't think that it will suddenly become free and fair and open and democratic, but I think what will continue to happen is that while the Kremlin controls television, television will play a smaller and smaller and smaller role, or will deliver less power to the Kremlin, because I think the proliferation of social media, and particularly with YouTube, I would say, because until that moment, you know, Facebook, Twitter, social networks is a particular medium, which is about just reading, but mostly, and some watching. But YouTube really offers different potential and prospect to opposition politicians, and I think it will increasingly be a challenge to the Kremlin, because yes, they control the television, but television no longer controls the country as they thought it did, particularly in big cities and particularly amongst the younger people. So I think there will be some fighting against YouTube and some fighting against social media. I don't think they will be successful. I don't think they can do what China did, because the Chinese had China has Chinese internet. They already had the whole infrastructure. By the time they closed down the Western social media, access to the Western social media, Russia doesn't really have its equivalent. So closing something down, which will be much more dramatic, and is likely to bring people out on the streets.